Okay, so to take it from here, I have just a little baby exercise for you. Grab a pen in your dominant hand, whatever hand you would normally write with, and take a sheet of paper and write your name. Easy peasy. Now take the writing utensil and move it to your non-dominant hand and write your name under the one you just wrote. Okay, so could you write with your non-dominant hand? Yes or no? Probably yes. Is one of them more attractive than the other? Was one of them easier than the other? Was one of them faster, like more efficient than the other? Probably yes to all of those things. So handedness, or being right-handed or left-handed, which most people are, is an example of preference. And that's really what Myers-Briggs is telling us, is about our preferences. So personality type is what you prefer when you are using your mind or focusing your attention. So when we're using our mind or focusing our attention, how often are you not using your mind? How often are you not focusing your attention? I'm kind of thinking these are like all the freaking time. How about you? You know, that's my conclusion. That feels true to me. And so personality type is your preferences when you are using your mind or focusing your attention. So preferences. So handedness is an example of preference. There's one way where it's so much easier. It's faster, it's definitely preferred to do it like this, versus if I had to do it the other way, like if there was a specific situation where the other way was required, technically I could do it. It's just going to take me longer, it's going to cost me more energy, and it's not going to be anything close to the quality of the result that I could get you if you let me do it in my dominant preference. If you let me write with my dominant hand, it'll be a more attractive outcome. Scooby! She is a little skittish since Dolly left. She's like having a moment, which is very unusual for her. So personality type is what you prefer when you are using your mind or focusing your attention. There are many benefits to understanding your own preferences, including how they affect you, how they affect your style of communication, and this was the big aha for me personally, how they are different from what other people prefer. So all of my history of interpersonal conflict that my life was basically defined by it. So much of that was me expecting other people to be like I was. And then I find out that less than 1% of women have my personality type. And all of a sudden, a lot more things started making sense. That like when I had struggled to be understood in the world, that was because I was an anomaly. I wasn't like most of the others. I was very different from them. And I was expecting that they were all like me. And that's not true either. So to clarify that these are the things that I prefer, and almost no one else on the planet prefers this list of things like I do. And understanding that was a huge, like that mountain of self-blame. It was such a huge release of all of that, because now I wasn't right and they're not wrong. They're not right, I'm not wrong. I prefer it this way. You prefer it your way. And we can both have it exactly how we want. That I'm right in my preferences. You're right in your preferences. And everybody else in the world is right in their preferences. Life got so much easier after that. And how could it not? Everybody's allowed to be exactly as they are. So if there's somebody in your world that you have a really hard time communicating with, there is almost certainly a very different wiring of your preferences. And so again, it just kind of takes all the taking it personal out of it. It's like, oh yeah, she's a feeler, I'm a thinker. Like, that makes sense. Like, she's a sensor, I'm an intuitive. That makes sense. Like, it's not my fault. It's not their fault. It's nobody's fault. We're just different, and that's okay. So with preferences, so this is where, introvert, extrovert, for example, is a preference. And introvert, extrovert, I feel like is probably one of the most misunderstood ones. Mostly I hear like introversion being compared to shy or reserved or like those kinds of attributes. And that's just not what it means. Shyness can be in anybody. It has nothing to do with like your preference for introverting or extroverting. What introvert, extrovert actually means is where you prefer to pay attention. So with introverting and extroverting, we're sourcing energy within how we're paying attention, if that makes sense. So with introverting, your attention, you prefer, meaning like it's easier, it costs you less energy, it is more natural. Introverting is when your attention is focused on your internal world. So your thoughts, your feelings, your bodily sensations. That's basically all that our inner world consists of. Sometimes it feels a lot more complicated than that, but I think those are basically thoughts, feelings, sensations. So when you are like how I was back in 2015, when I would take Myers-Briggs, I was like 90+% introverted. And all that means is that like when we think about like how well I could pay attention to the world around me, how well I could pay attention to other people outside of myself, it cost me so much energy. It was like trying to write with a misshapen claw of a non-dominant hand. I just could barely do it. And so having a job where that's all I did all day long, extroverting, it stretched me in a really uncomfortable / helpful way, because it forced me to get better at it, which I'm very grateful for, because now I do feel a lot more balanced, even though I spend 99% of my time in solitude, where I can be completely 100% turned inward towards my inner world. Because if I'm being honest about my preferences, that's where I source my energy. Every ounce of paying attention outside of myself is costing me energy by the second. And that bank balance comes down real quick. And so you think about like having that flipped, right? So like an extrovert like Carla in my earlier story, my would have been mother-in-law. I would guess, I never had her take the test, but I would guess that she is extremely extroverted, like in the 90+% range of being extroverted, which on the other side means that you're paying attention to the outside world. And because introversion, extroversion is about sourcing energy, she gets her energy from paying attention to other people outside of herself, the world outside of herself, events and happenings outside of herself. That is giving her energy. That's giving her life force. And for her to be alone and have nothing but her inner world to focus her attention on is going to cost her energy really, really, really fast. So the bank balance comes down really fast when you're in solitude as an extrovert. And I think that's what we heard during the early stages of the pandemic. My heart really went out to those people, those extroverts that really were sourcing their energy from the outside world. And then we go on lockdown, and what that must have been like. The same probably as when I'm trying to live working in the software company, where I'm having to extrovert 80% of my time, and it was literally killing me. So physical isolation for an extrovert is literally killing them. It's not to say we all should have the same tolerance for solitude and being inside our inner world. So if that is your preference, which in the group we have all introverts except our lovely little extrovert friend Janine. Welcome, Janine, we love you. Which I also think is awesome that they say like introverts don't gather, they don't congregate. And I'm like, that's wrong. That's not true. Because look, I'm a majorly introverted person, and here I am bringing together a very like dominantly introverted group. And when we look at introvert extrovert amongst the population, it's 50-50. So the fact that we have like all introverts except one, that tells you something about the type of, I don't know, I guess the type of person I attract, the type of message I put out, and who's likely to resonate with that. I do feel like one of my personal happinesses, my personal like sourcing my own happiness, I love giving introverts like a permission slip to like spend more time by yourself. Get away from the other people so that you can focus on your thoughts, feelings, and sensations. If you're not doing that for the dominant part of your waking hours, then you're basically out of balance with your own preferences. And in our current culture, especially pre-pandemic, ain't nobody got time for that, because every single thing that we did was extroverted. We're expected to be out there at work with the other people, doing the things outside of ourselves, and quiet inner alone time is some kind of luxury that 99% of the planet can't afford. And I'm like, half of you are introverts. So half of you need to be making the time. And I feel like the pandemic brought it way more into balance with things like work from home coming into pop culture, where now that's normal for me to get to work at home, for me to get to work in the middle of the night if I want to. Like, having more balance in your world so that you're living in alignment with your preferences. Nothing is right or wrong, but understanding what you prefer so that you can like orient your time in that direction is super helpful. And like we talked about last time, I think, or that might have been on a live stream, I might have not mentioned that last time in the session, but there's this concept, the power of 1 degree turns, where like if you're an airplane flying over a distance of 10,000 miles, and if you just go straight the whole time, you'll hit your destination. But if you, every half hour, you turn the plane 1 degree to the right, and then another half hour, and you turn the plane 1 degree to the right, and you keep doing that every half hour over 10,000 miles, you will land somewhere completely different than the original destination where you were supposed to land. So 1 degree, 1% may not sound like it's a big enough deal to even mess with. I would argue it's the only way that change happens, basically. So it's like, okay, so if you're an introvert, let's say, which most of you are, Janine, flip it. But if you're an introvert and you can see in your world where most of your time is around people, then the question would be, how can I spend 1% more time, maybe 5 extra minutes a day, in physical solitude? Like, how do I carve that out for myself? And Dolly does a really fun thing where she basically takes the long way home. Like, so often we think we have to just get where we're going as fast as we possibly can. And every day when she leaves work, she like heads like away from where we live, and she goes that way, and then comes back around, and she takes the dirt roads. She goes out through nature, out where nobody lives, and it's just pastures and cows and horses. And so she drives through that. It takes her 5 extra minutes, but she's by herself, she's driving, she's got her windows down, like she's off work, she's done for the day. Like, she just, you know, everybody's going to drive home. Well, maybe not if you work from home, but like you're driving home from work kind of no matter what. And so it's like, can you even just like the thing that's already there, okay, 5 extra minutes. Nice. 1 degree, 1% more in alignment with your own preferences. And that's cool to understand, like it said, about how that might be different from what other people prefer. If you have an extroverted partner, when they come home from work, chances are they're, depending on what they do, I guess, they're going to be more likely to want to engage with you, where an introverted partner coming home at the end of the day may be more likely to need like time alone or time to decompress before engaging. So helpful to understand, like, where is the person getting their energy? And it's not about right or wrong. It's just, How can I line my life up with the way that I'm going to naturally find my energy? So the next piece is sensing and intuition. So this one is a little bit different than extrovert introvert, where they're half and half. With sensing and intuition, 73% of the population work with sensing, and 27% of the population work with intuition. And these two functions are for gathering information. That's like the process that you're doing when you're engaging with your intuition or sensing. And so the difference between the two is sensing is literal five senses, physical, concrete reality. So the facts, the physical, concrete details, the proof, the structure that physically exists, and you can point to it and say, this is a cell phone. That's a fact. So that's sensing. And 73% of the world lives in that world, where when we're talking about how do you gather your information, we're really talking about what sources of information do you trust most. And that's going to say a lot about what kinds of information you wind up with inside of yourself when it comes time to do the next part that we're going to talk about thinking and feeling, where you're making decisions. So the decision, the final outcome, is going to be very different if you've collected the facts, the sensing, the physical senses, the see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it reality version, or if you have gathered information through your intuition, which is abstract, it's unproven, it's imagined, it's projected. These are the possibilities. This is a sense of saying, like, I can see this pattern emerging from the data, so that makes me think by a month from now, we're going to see this, this, and this. If you're telling that story to a sensor, they have no ability usually to get a handle on what you're talking about. And this was my experience at the software company. This one, the gathering information, like what sources of information do you trust most? And 73% of the population being sensing, meaning they trust the physical facts that you can see and hear and smell and taste and touch. Oh, that let me off the hook. I felt like I was crazy in a world that just like I just did not fit into. And this was one of the biggest pieces, was realizing that a quarter of people on the planet are able to go with you when you start talking about possibilities and abstractions and, you know, taking this dot from over here and connecting it with this dot over here and like putting it together and saying, see? And a sensor is going to be like, no, I don't see. Literally, I don't. The intuition can make the leap. The sensing cannot. The sensing has to go from this point to this point to this point to this point to this point, because that's how you move in the physical reality. Nothing makes a leap. Everything in physicality moves at an incremental pace. And when you have a sensing dominant brain, that's what you're looking for, is the incremental process. So that gave me a sense of like, okay, so when I take my intuition, when I say like, you know, this is what I'm sensing, or this is the vision I got, this is what I can see in the future, depending on who I'm going to talk to about it is how I'm going to present it. Because if I'm talking to like the physical ones, the sensors, I'm going to break it down a whole lot more. I'm going to include a whole lot more of my proof as much as I possibly can, given that the whole thing is a vision of my imagination. Vice versa, when I am talking to a fellow intuitive who can also make the leap, also notice how, you know, there's 73% of the world who are sensors and who are living in this dominantly physical reality. And then there's this other set that like, there's just more to life than what you can physically see and hear. And we all understand that because 100% of the results in the group came back as intuitive, and only 27% of the population is. So again, I feel like that is another big permission slip that I love to grant to my fellow intuitives, is to surround yourself with fellow intuitives and learn how to talk to the sensors. It's two different things. One is staying in line with your preference, because when you're going to have to break it down into sensor language, that costs energy. It's $100 a minute to just like have to talk about it like this. It does not come naturally. Versus surrounding yourself with fellow intuitives, you'll be able to leap and leap and leap and leap, and they'll just keep up with you, and it's so fun. And that's sourcing energy. And so that is like, again, it's just thinking about, we're all intuitives in this group, and so how much of your time are you surrounded by fellow intuitives, and how much of your time are you having to break it down into sensor speak, meaning the physical, tangible, incremental details? So none of it's right or wrong. It's about that 1 degree turn. So once we've gathered information, and right, depending on which source we trust, that is the information that we gather. And let me actually... Okay, so we have our information, and now we're ready to make a decision. So this one is a little bit more balanced between thinking and feeling. 60% are feeling, and 40% are thinking. So we're slightly skewed as a population towards feeling. I would argue because that's an older part of our brain. Feeling is much closer to how the amygdala works with us, our adrenaline system that can trigger fight or flight. Feeling is a much faster way to think. Thinking takes a lot of time to map it all out and get all your details together. And especially if you're a dominant feeler, thinking is, again, it's costing you energy the more you're inside of it, and vice versa if you're a dominant thinker. So when we talk about thinking and feeling, we're talking about how you're making decisions. And again, all of us can do all of them. Like if you really wanted to think through a decision as a feeler, for example, which all of you, I guess, I'm the only thinker, pretty sure. Cool. So if you're a feeler, if you want to think through a decision, you can, but that is not your best bet. That's going to be really laborious. That's like writing your name with your non-dominant hand. And why would you do that if you don't have to? So this is, again, where we can look at when you make important decisions, or any decisions really, as a feeler. Are you more often going with your feeling? Are you listening to what your feeling says and moving in that direction, allowing your value system, your beliefs, the individualized scenario, meaning like nothing is really black and white. There's all kinds of shades of gray, and given the situation in front of you is going to be how you respond in that moment, again, according to your value system and your beliefs. There's a subjectivity to it in terms of, again, deciding based on the situation that's exactly in front of you. So it's a much softer approach to making decisions because it takes into account all the people and the impacts and the pieces, the human element of what the decision is ultimately going to cause. Compared to thinking, when you're making a decision with thinking, you are outlining logic, reason. It's a very high level, detached, impartial process. You're also working more from a sense of what's fair based on predefined rules for engagement. So based on the rules, and if you like compare that to or contrast it with feeling, like that's where gray lives, and over here in thinking is where black and white live. So like the law, the letter of the law that says if you committed this crime, then you're going to go away for this amount of time. That's the thinking, that's the structure. But you think about like it's not as black and white as that even. We've made it a range because I think as humans we understand that we do lean towards feeling. We want to be able to weigh the gray area. We want to be able to say that was a crime of passion, or there were extenuating circumstances, or they were really abused and they were, defending themselves. Like there are all kinds of reasons and specific circumstances that can sway our final decision when we're using our feeling in the process. And so again, I come to this Like, again, back in 2015 when I first found it, like my thinking score was a lot like my introverted score, where it was like 80 plus percent towards thinking. And that was very reflective of my lack of patience that I had towards people who wanted to weigh out all the gray area. Like, I just didn't see the point. I'm like, this is the rule. This is how it works. Like, we're done. Like, it's over. This was the black and white, 2 + 2 = 4, and it's over. That's the logical answer. And now my thinking feeling is very balanced. It's like almost in the middle, because I have like within myself like balanced those elements of, I do think that for all of us there are times where it makes sense to employ some thinking, some rationale, some logic, some exploring the reasoning of what we're doing here, and that kind of critical thinking approach. I think there are times when that is valid. And I think there are times when, like most of the time, when our feeling is so much faster. It really is so much faster. You can cut out all kinds of unnecessary mental clutter by just listening to what your feelings are telling you. Like Abraham-Hicks teaches, like the whole premise of what Abraham-Hicks teaches is that our emotions are our own internal guidance system. And with those emotions, we personally have access to, in any moment in time, what is right for ourselves. We can navigate according to that, and that has nothing to do with whether you prefer thinking or feeling. And that's why I think, like, as I've studied Abraham and, really gotten in touch with my emotional guidance system, my thinking and feeling are extremely balanced. Because I do really honestly appreciate that there is room for both, but I think if I'm being honest, in my personal thinking and the part that's faster and easier and more efficient for me, I'm definitely a thinker more than I'm a feeler. So, cool. But again, I'm like, okay, so especially if you're a feeler, how often do you let yourself just make a feeling decision versus how often do you feel the need to prove it out with logic and facts and reasoning and support and rationale? And who is that for? Do you need that, or is that so that you can explain it to the people around you and that they can agree that you deserve to have what it is that your feelings are saying that you want and need in that moment? Just some food for thought. And last but not least is judging and perceiving. So this is our general attitude towards life. And this is probably they're all such big differences when you really think about it. I think sensing and intuition was definitely the biggest aha for me. But I think as a perceiver, it might be this one. So if you have a P in your type, I think this one explains a lot. So attitude towards life, judging and perceiving. These are very close. Perceiving is 46%, judging is 54%. I question that a little bit, just because I think judging is much more prized by our culture, same as extroversion, where I think people might think that the right way to be is to answer the questions in a judging way, which I'm going to tell you in a second what that means, as opposed to admitting that they are a perceiver. I think that might be part of it. So the fact that you all came back knowing and admitting that you're a perceiver, kudos, because the world is not kind to you guys and they want to make you fit into a judging box. And embracing your perceiverness, it'll set you free. Oh boy, will it set you free. So judging, if you have a J in your type, you prefer things to be neat, orderly, established, settled, and scheduled in advance. Meaning you want to know the plan ahead of time. And probably, depending on exactly what your type is, like my type where I lead with intuition and I want to know what the plan is, like I'll have a plan and then my intuition gives me the backup plan, and then my intuition will give me the backup plan to the backup plan. So like, I like plans. I really like plans. That's why I'm a project manager by trade, which is basically the art and skill of making a really good plan, getting us to a certain destination on time. So I found a way actually after Myers-Briggs, because that wasn't until 2016. So I had been studying Myers-Briggs for like a year and a half by the time I like took my project management professional certification and like really officially transitioned to that part of my career, where basically I took my preferences and I made them work for me. You know, in life, you cannot always have a plan. And I had so much struggle in my world in the areas where planning is not possible, where I was trying to make there be a plan and try to like do it, make it happen through planning. And that just doesn't always work. As opposed to if you're a perceiver, you prefer things to be spontaneous, open-ended, flexible, and that planning anything in advance doesn't really make sense to a perceiver because they want to pick the best possible option at any given moment. And if you're saying like, okay, well, will you commit to going to Italy with me in 6 months? Even though maybe that's like an amazing option, a perceiver is still going to feel like, no, I don't want to, because I want to get to 6 months from now and then I want to see like, is Italy my best bet, or is there somebody else that I want to travel with, or is there a different job maybe that I want to be taking, or like, I don't want to be tied down because another good option might come up. And I think, you know, that's FOMO, basically, fear of missing out. And so when you're a perceiver, wanting to leave things open-ended, wanting to be spontaneous and last minute, that, again, it's like your dominant hand. It's very easy for you. It is energy giving, not energy taking. Making a plan is going to cost you energy. Just like if you're a judger, leaving it open-ended is going to cost you energy. Just like the last session we did, I said that pushed me to my growth edge, and it was on this one because I am very much a judger. I want to plan in advance so that I have the backup plan and the backup plan. So to just not have a plan, to literally walk into it totally naked, was the most perceiver-like thing I could have ever done, and I survived. And in that, there is a level of self-trust that gets built. So I would say, like, if you're a perceiver, being able to make and stick to or follow through with plans, it's going to build your self-trust, no doubt about it. Like exploring the opposite of your preferences, surviving in those situations is always going to build up your self-trust, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I would suggest, and what I try to do is, like, you know, maybe 10, 20, 30% of the time, I'm exploring outside my preferences to help build up my confidence and my self-trust and my adaptability and those sorts of things. But then most of the time, 70, 80, 90% of the time, I am living in alignment with my preferences. I'm doing what comes naturally to me and making it work for me. So I don't try to plan every second of every day like I used to, but I do make my money as a project manager, as a professional planner. So like that's what I'm doing right now in the project that I'm kicking off, is making the timeline. I'm like working through, we want to get there by August 1st of 2023 with this package of completed work. And so how are we going to work through the next 13 months to get ourselves there on time? What are the dates and deadlines and tasks and people and what needs to happen for the next 13 months so that we can get there? So using my preferences to work for me and serve me, and then recognizing when it comes to relationships, when it comes to day-to-day life, I really would rather live like a perceiver. It's truly easier when you come in contact with those areas of life where a plan is just never going to work, like personal relationships, to just be able to let go of the plan and to be okay operating as a perceiver, and vice versa. You know, but again, the same as all the other ones, like if you're a perceiver, which most of you are, and you're living in a world where you have a schedule and it's regimented and there's a routine, it's the same, it's lots of scheduling far in advance, there's no room for spontaneity whatsoever. What's a 1% turn? What's a 1-degree turn that you could make to carve out a little bit more time in your world to get to be spontaneous?